I talk a lot about riding from center and making sure your leg and rein aids are congruent with center. And I think that it's really helpful to actually demonstrate what that means with Mr. Delton here, who is a skeleton, as you may have noticed. When we're talking about center or the seat, we're talking about not just your actual butt that touches the saddle, but your midsection or your core, which makes up basically your entire rib cage, front and back, your back muscles and your abdominal muscles and your pelvis. So that's a huge amount of you that we're really not that familiar with. So when you're sitting in the saddle, in order to get centered, I'm not talking necessarily about symmetry. I'm talking about equal feeling on both sides of the horse. And one thing that most riders tend to do is to lead with their upper bodies and collapse to one side when making a change. So let's say you're changing gait. We tend to lead with our upper body and have a rotation. Or you're making a change of direction, or you're asking the horse to do something. Generally, when our hands get involved, we tend to have an upward movement with the upper body and a rotation. And what that does to center is make it unequal. So if we were looking at our skeletons when we're doing that, let's say I'm turning right, the part between, let's move his arm out of the way, the right side of the rib and the hip would become shortened. So it would basically look like this. And this part would become elongated. So we would have unequal spacing between the right side and the left side. In other words, we would have contraction here and laxity here. So this part would basically be pulling me around. So when we're riding from center, what we want to do is get our hips equal in the saddle. So the right side and the left side are feeling the saddle on both sides. Your right hip and your left hip are feeling the saddle equally on both sides. And then we want to think about this nice space here where your stomach would be. That space needs to be open. So if I collapse my stomach, my rib cage would drop down, dropping my sternum down, closing my center. So I want to keep my stomach open, nice and soft, and I want to think about my rib cage, which starts all the way up here. We tend to think about our rib cage as down here, but your rib cage actually starts all the way up here. I want to think about here's your center line, and you would want to imagine the ribs springing open from that center line so that you have plenty of space within your center. And then as you turn, you would want to keep your center leading the turn. In other words, you want to make sure you don't collapse through the turn, but that you basically lead through your belly button. So your belly button is tracing this line that allows you to turn without collapse. So it's almost like your spine is a barber pole, and when we're turning, start at the base of the spine, one vertebrae at a time, and the head comes last, as opposed to leading in a rotation like this, where my head falls through the rotation of the turn. So think about your skeleton when you're riding, and think about the space between your ribs and your hips, and try to keep those equal, especially through turns. That way your center stays stable and the horse can follow it.